Hi, I'm Jeff and welcome to my shop. In this project video I'm going to show you how I built this sculpted modern bar stool. So this bar stool is made out of cherry, starting from rough lumber. I utilize plans that I purchased from Canadian Woodworks, and I'll put a link down below for that. So in addition to this project video where I go fairly quickly through this entire process from rough lumber to the end, I also have a 8-part series that goes into more depth if you're interested in that, so please check that out on my YouTube page as well. So please enjoy, and thank you for watching. I appreciate it. So I've organized this project video in the same way that I did the 8-part instructional series. So here in the first part, I'm starting by unpacking all of the templates from the kit that I bought from Canadian Woodworks. I glue those onto 1/2-inch Baltic birch plywood, and then I cut them out getting close to the lines on the bandsaw. These are then brought to the final line on the oscillating sander, and because these are used as patterns later, it's important that you get very smooth and fair surfaces, as that's what's going to result in your final part. So here I'm gluing up 2 halves of a seat. So this material is just shy of 2 inches thick, and I carefully selected the 2 boards so that they would have a nice looking grain match across the entire width of the seat. After allowing sufficient time for the glue to dry, I then start cutting out the joinery. So here we're using maloof joints to join the seat to the legs, first starting by cutting out the notches for the back, and then inset up further now for the front legs using a dado stack at the table saw. Next, using a rabbiting bit on the router, I cut rabbets on both sides of each of those notches that results in the seat portion of the maloof joint. Then I start on the legs, so this is using rough lumber that has been dimensioned to thickness, flat, plane, and square. I trace the patterns of the legs using a Sharpie and then cut close to those lines on the bandsaw. I want to leave a thin 1/8 or a fat 1/16 of extra material for the next step, which will be pattern routing. After temporarily adhering the pattern onto the part, leaving a little bit of room all the way around, it then goes to the router table where I have a pattern bit. This has a bearing on the bottom that rides along the pattern. As you do this, it's important to pay attention to grain direction so that you don't go uphill and then tear chunks of your part out. You go all the way around the part on this side, using that pattern as a reference. and then remove the pattern, flip the part over, and now the bearing rides along the routed portion of the part, and you finish it off at the edge and have a beautiful part that matches exactly to your template. No matter how careful you are, there's a chance you're also going to have a little pile of parts that didn't quite make it that you had to start over on. At the drill press with a Forstner bit, I drill the access holes for the screws that are going to be some of the joinery. Then within these screw heads will be hidden, and they'll be filled with contrasting plugs. Back at the table saw, I cut all of the portions of the maloof joints on the legs that can be done here. For the portions that can't lie flat on the table saw bed, they have to be cut by hand using a back saw, chisels, as well as a router plane. Using a round-over bit that matches the inside of the maloof joints on the chair seat, we create the ends of the legs. These then fit perfectly into the seat to create the three-dimensional maloof joints. After tracing the shape from the template, the seat outsides are then cut to their near final shape. After drilling several holes in the seat to show depths where I'm going to carve to, I begin power carving, here using a cut saw disc on my angle grinder. This process is pretty intimidating at first, but the skills accumulate pretty quickly, and you find you get a little bit more comfortable and have more control with some practice. After the requisite tushy test, the seat is sanded up to 320 grit, essentially ready for finish. Now with something that's sort of starting to look a little bit like a stool, it's time to work on the backrest as well as the braces. So here using the patterns on a thick piece of wood that I have already cut to exactly match the distance between the two rear legs, they're then shaped rough on the bandsaw. First by cutting out the back curve, front to back. And then with the pattern piece taped back on, cutting out the shape from the front and back. Similarly, the braces and the footrest seen here are cut to width right off of the partially assembled stool, and then they're pattern routed to get to their final shape. Here I'm using the blue tape and super glue trick, which can make this a little bit easier to manage than double stick tape, which can be a challenge. The remaining screw holes are drilled first with a Forstner for the plug that's going to go over top of the screw head, and then with a straight bit for the shank of the screw. All of the braces and the footrest can then be screwed temporarily in place, and we have a dry assembled stool. For assembly and glue up, I chose to use epoxy to give myself a little bit more working time. For the maloof joints, I thickened that epoxy up with some micro balloons just to make sure that it would fill any gaps that I might have had, though I was very careful in creating the joinery and I didn't have any visible gaps. The back brace was glued and then screwed into place. Then the back brace was similarly glued and screwed. The front legs were glued in place, again using epoxy, and then clamped. Glue and screw again for the footrest. And then both of the side braces, though I'm only showing one here. After all the glue had had some opportunity to dry, I then glued walnut plugs into each of the screw holes. I think the contrast of the walnut with the cherry looks really nice. At this point we have a effectively complete and fully functional stool. It feels pretty good to sit in it. It's nice and sturdy, but it looks really blocky and kludgy. So an awful lot of time was spent power carving, getting all the joints nice and smooth, and then, as you'll see in a second, shaping all of the legs and all of the intersections between each of the parts so that it looks nice and flow and has some good organic looking curves. Additional shaping was done using my Festool Rotex sander in Rotex mode with 40 grit paper. After shaping and getting that done, I slowly moved into sanding all the way up through 320 grit. After applying my Maker's Mark brand, finishing was done in two phases. First, starting here with Danish oil. I love Danish oil and how it brings out the color and the grain and the depth of the wood. I applied coats continuously until it stopped absorbing over the course of 2 days. That ended up being about 7 or 8 coats. I allowed the Danish oil almost a week to fully cure, and then followed up with semi-gloss polyurethane for additional protection and long-lasting wear. And finally, here's the finished product. I'm really proud of it and happy with how it turned out. I hope you like it and hope you enjoyed watching the video. If so, please feel free to like, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thank you very much.